Well, let's talk all about this now with Johnson Emmanuel Chukwuka, the chairman of the board of the Nigeria Russia Trade and Investment Advisory Council. Johnson, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us here at Moscow.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. We're getting a lot of reports. We're seeing it in some of the, some people are calling it the right-leaning media, Trump's favorite media. They're talking all about this genocide against Christians in Nigeria. I've spoken to guests from Nigeria. I've spoken to the presidential advisor from Nigeria. He says, look, there is violence happening there against all ethnicities. It's not just one. It's everyone is kind of finding themselves under the hammer right now from various fundamentalists. Trump using a lot of rhetoric about Christians in Nigeria right now. He's calling it a genocide, which is a very strong word. How would you interpret his opinion on this?
Anyway, it's quite clear what America stands for in Nigeria. So there's nothing new. There's been a long-time agenda or plan, rather, that the U.S. have against Nigeria, to disintegrate the country. It's been a worked-out plan, so they've been attempting this through many means.
But what's the interest? Sorry, why Nigeria? What are they interested in Nigeria?
Anyway, Nigeria is a very strategic country.
Yeah.
So, and then I think with the resources Nigeria has, which also draws the attention of the U.S., and then they will do everything to hold Nigeria. And then breaking Nigeria will actually give them a hedge.
So what kind of resources are we talking here? Because, you've got Venezuela that's also in the crosshairs right now. Trump's very excited about Caracas. We know Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. Although it's a heavy oil, it requires a lot of refining. What's Nigeria got that's so attractive?
Okay, so Nigeria has crude oil, just like Venezuela. Nigeria has gas and other mineral resources also, lithium, gold and stuff like that.
Yeah, lots of goodies.
A lot, exactly. Yeah. And then, of course, these are enough to attract the attention of the U.S. And then, so they can go about this. And then, in our history, we understand that it would be misleading for us to actually think that U.S. is our partner.
You think it's misleading to think of the U.S. as your partner?
Exactly.
That's a really strong comment, Johnson. There will be many other countries in the world, or perhaps even on your continent, that would disagree with you, perhaps, on that.
Anyway, partnership are built on mutual trust and then respect.
Yes.
This was never built between us and the U.S. In fact, the history of U.S. having their embassy in Nigeria is dated back to 1945, when Nigeria was still under the colonial master. Now, one will ask the question, what did the U.S. do in order to help Nigeria get itself out of the colonial era?
Tell me.
U.S. got independence in 1776. As a matter of fact, has an experience of what it is to be under colonial rule.
Yeah.
U.S. never helped Nigeria. The British invaded Nigeria in 1851. There was no attempt by the U.S. to help Nigeria, to stop the British. And then U.S. came to Nigeria in 1945, while Nigeria was still under colonial rule. U.S. never did anything, but rather supported the British to hold Nigeria. So it's been misleading for Nigerians to actually think that U.S. is a partner.
But do you think the average Nigerian understands this? What is the average Nigerian's position on President Trump's remarks? There's a genocide in Nigeria, and we might have to come in with the military and put American boots on the ground, which he has said. Yeah,
because the U.S. controls the media, so average Nigerian will see what they hear on the media. But now, if we are to reason over the issues, like some few months ago, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Nigeria, came out with some warnings that the U.S. have been insisting on sending some prisoners of Venezuelan origin to Nigeria, of which the Nigerian government refused.
Yeah.
Now, a few months later, we're hearing about this blackmail of the genocide. If we put the dots together, we understand where this is coming from.
Isn't that interesting? Because I was just going to ask you, Johnson, looking at Venezuela, for example, Washington again is trying to oust the sitting president. We all remember Juan Guaido, what a failure and a joke that was. Do you see parallels between what's happening in Venezuela and what's potentially happening in Nigeria?
Of course.
You do?
Of course. Yeah. And then the same thing is that the whole story centers on the same resource that both countries have.
It is fascinating when you see what's happening. Friend or foe alike, whether it's tariffs or sanctions, or it's either you play by our book or you don't get to play at all. I was just going to say, looking at Venezuela, Washington's trying to oust a sitting president, and yet coming back to Nigeria, many Africans say U.S. pressure and sanctions, these resemble a new form of colonialism. Now, some people say, for example, I'm one of them, that neo-colonialism still exists, for example, with the IMF and the World Bank, which force feeds high-interest loans to developing countries that they can never pay these loans back, and they end up being forced to sell off their national assets to the IMF. I call it neo-colonialism. What do you call it, Johnson?
I would rather call it colonialism because it has not ended. Because as it is, for example, in Nigeria, our electoral system is actually being handled by the West. You know, they detect who will be our leaders with their interference in our elections. That means they choose our leaders for us. The people don't choose their leaders by themselves. This shows that we are still under the colonial rule. And then they control our policies. You know, they are the ones that detect the policies for the country. And our budget actually is being also organized by the same Western interests. So to say it's a new colonialism, I think we have not ended our colonial...
It never stopped, Johnson. Never stopped, that's what it just never stopped. Do you remember a grey-haired old guy called Joseph Borrell, former senior top official of the European Union? He went for a visit about a year or so ago to Africa, and he came back and he said, I can't believe why there's so much support in Africa for Russia. Joseph Borrell said, quote unquote, these people of Africa need to have their heads reprogrammed. Well, I guess no surprise from the EU guy, Joseph Borrell, but do you believe that African nations should look to partners like Russia and or China to potentially counterbalance the West?
Historically, Africans understood, and then they still understand that the role the Russians have played, you know, in terms of global integration and then helping Africans. You know, Russia have been so vivid and then so vocal about helping Africans. It is on the record. Russia never colonized any part of Africa, much more the world. And then Russia has also played some important roles in helping African countries get freedom from colonial masters. In fact, Russia paid the ultimate price to end fascism, which also Africa is a major victim of such. You know, Russia paid, I think, over 27 million Russians gave their life. So Africans, they see Russia as a friend, as a partner. And then also, I also know that Russia also sees Africa as equal partners.
Definitely.
So I think that's the direction. And then this is something that nobody can take away from Africans, no matter what. I think the time has come that Africans have realized this.
It's such a good comment, Johnson. You know, we're witnessing this multipolar world that's really coming into fruition these days. And it's a multipolar world that's based on mutual respect, precisely what you said to me at the beginning of our conversation. Johnson Emmanuel Chukwuka is the chairman at the board of the Nigeria-Russia Trade and Investment Advisory Council, joining us here at the RT headquarters in Moscow. A pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.